a lot of the listeners of this podcast, they're kind of up and coming leaders and have probably been practitioners 2-3 years ago and are now kind of coming into leadership roles and are managing sometimes 2, sometimes 5, up to 10 people. Like, what are some of the major like mindset shifts for you that have enabled you to kind of go through this journey from kind of being a practitioner to a CMO? Because I assume that a lot of people listening to this are kind of aspiring to a similar trajectory.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much how to narrow that down. I think it first depends on what kind of job you take when it comes into being a leader. I've lived in the stages where, you're deep in the startup mode as a marketing leader, which is very different than when you're working at a business that's more at growth stage and you're trying to figure out how you're scaling. So I'll kind of speak to the common denominators that I think I've found in all of those areas. And looking back, every year I learn a little bit more. And I think the first thing by far that I've learned is you don't know what you don't know, and don't pretend to. I think when you're early in your career, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes into being in these different stages where you're taking on leadership roles and you feel like you are responsible for having to know all the things. And I think that one of the biggest shifts that I saw at some stage in my career, and I still live in this sometimes, right, is that feeling of having to have an answer and not having the answer, and then, being scared or being worried about, like, what if I don't answer this right? And so I think that shift is when I was able to recognize that you don't know what you don't know, but you can get that answer. And so sometimes the best answer is, that's a great question. I don't actually know that right now, but I'll find out. And then you come back and make sure that you follow through on finding out. And so that's a big one, is regardless of where you are in your career, you'll never have all the answers. And you're also not expected to. And I think that's part of mindset shift number 2 is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's a thing that I've struggled with at every different stage of my career, is you get to a point in your career or in leadership that you're there because you have that experience and because you've done these things before. And that is great when you're leading a team, because you're able to help in talking the talk and understanding the language. But that's not your job anymore. Your job is to actually help empower and serve the people that work with you to grow in their career and help them scale up. And so as you think about that, just because I can doesn't mean I should. You have to really think through delegation and not doing it in a micromanagey, I need somebody to do this thing kind of way. But how do you empower the people when you don't have an answer to help you find that answer, and to recognize that, that's their job and your job is to help serve them continue to grow. And so I think I try to connect those things together very often in more of this servant leadership approach of not coming in and dictating, and not coming in and trying to answer all the things or live in imposter syndrome and feel like I had to have them, and instead recognize that I'm way better when I hire people so much smarter than me to help us get to the end result that we're trying to drive to. Because a lot of the times when you get beyond that startup stage and into the growth stage, your job is to know, but it's also to be the communicator and to also empower and scale and build teams, which is very different than being the person that's actually doing the work. Don't get me wrong, I still love doing the work sometimes. And I love those days where I can roll up my sleeves and write an email nurture sequence or do something that kind of fills that marketer in me. But I think that's been a big shift, is recognizing that importance of serving and that importance of kind of living within that space of you don't have to have all the answers.